The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please support this motion. I see this bill as a power grab by the legislature. This is a direct slap in the face to the voters who just passed an initiative just years ago that banned a statewide income tax. This is in direct violation of our Constitution. Not only did the voters pass an initiative just recently that banned a proposal just like this, I think it's disingenuous to then have a proposal like this claiming that there's support for democracy and then completely eliminate the citizens' ability to challenge this via referendum. Right now, our state is facing tons of new taxes, tax increases, fees that are really taxes. The people have had enough. The people will voice it, and having this proposal where the people will not even get the chance to exercise their voice like they should via constitutional amendment to impose something like this, but via referendum, is an insult to the voters of Washington, who are already fed up and are dangerously close to throwing tea into Puget Sound. Please table this motion.
Member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a great amendment that restates the intent to highlight what can happen, the tax volatility that's real. There's a lot of discussion that you heard already about all of the different income streams for the state via the tax revenues. There are a couple that I think were missed. The first is the Climate Commitment Act funds, the gas taxes, all the vehicle taxes, all the fees. I like to call a lot of the fees the gaslighting tax because they're pushed to the people as a fee, but then the fee doesn't even go to what the people are sold the fee increases for. I mean, one of my favorite examples is the Columbia River salmon endorsement. Yet any of the areas along the Columbia River that have anything to do with fish and game see none of the impact of that fee. And everybody has to pay it, whether they go down there and fish salmon on the Columbia River or anywhere else in the state. These fees are pushed on people, and they're ever increasing. Now, this amendment talks about volatility. You heard arguments that were talking about how a wide net helps helps maintain stability. Well, an income tax will not help that, and we don't need any additional revenue streams. There are plenty, and all of those revenue streams have been ratcheted up this session. Every fee that can be even thought of has been increased either last session or this session. Permission to read, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Public Policy Institute of California. They had a study on California's tax system and argued that the state's revenue is unusually volatile because it depends heavily on income taxes, particularly the capital gains and personal incomes. Mr. Speaker, we've already seen what happens in the state of Washington when it comes to the capital gains tax and how volatile that is. Passing this legislation is going to open the state up to an even more volatile tax stream and is going to damage business and push people out of the state of Washington. This is not what our K through 12 education needs. This is not what the health care needs for the state of Washington. We need to have stability that we can budget on. So rather than finding another income stream or increasing all of the other revenue streams of the state of Washington, let's start balancing the budget on a way where we're restraining our spending. Please vote yes for this amendment to highlight the volatility that this will bring.
For the remarks, the good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the intent language. However, I'm not sure if it's enough for me to vote yes on this amendment. You know, it's aspirational to want to help disenburden the people of Washington, specifically in the low and middle income tax brackets, we'll say. Unfortunately, I don't see anything beyond an intent section update. You know, real relief for the taxpayers of Washington would come with actual objective steps that were sweeping against the so-called regressive tax policies. But I don't see an end or a significant lowering of a sales tax. I don't see gas taxes changing. I see ever-increasing fees. I see couching fee authority into the bureaucratic agencies throughout the state without any caps being implemented into them. I don't see actual tax relief based on the policies that have been passed this session or last. In fact, this morning in appropriations, there was an amendment onto one of the bills that actually couches students running START aid, having it restored, on whether or not this bill passes. It's really frustrating that the only way forward, so we're told, is through the passage of an income tax and how it's going to fix the regressive tax policy of Washington. But this is just an additive tax. None of those regressive taxes are going away. Nothing in the underlying bill actually provides real relief. It's really frustrating. Unfortunately, this bill, in my opinion, is just a Trojan horse that is bound to destroy the economy of Washington. So please vote no, Mr. Speaker. Just a little bit ago, we adopted an amendment that would change the intent section to provide, that is the intent of the legislature, to provide tax relief to low and middle class or earners, whatever phrase to say. This is an opportunity to do that. It's a good amendment. Please vote yes on it. The concern here is businesses are being taxed, like we heard from some of this discussion, on top of taxes, on top of taxes. I have several friends that own small businesses in the service industry, and with their historical business process, they were paying about 1.75% in B&O taxes. Well, last year that was also increased, so now they're paying just over 2%. Well, that wasn't the end of it. Now they also are rolled up into this new sales tax of 6.5% plus the local tax. So now we're looking at 8.5%. When they're paying that on gross receipts, it is incredibly painful for their business when they go from a 1.75% to an 8 oh, I can't math right now. I'm tired. But it is going up exponentially. This is a quick way when we're talking about adding an income tax to offset the regressive taxes. This is a solution. This is a solution that we can do right now. I really have trouble understanding some of the arguments against this amendment. And I hope that you can join me in voting yes on this amendment to do something for the people of Washington right now with their small businesses failing, with them having to look at ways to move out of our state. Rather than having a collapse of our tax revenue, let's just pass this simple amendment so that we can do something now for the people of Washington.
Remarks. The member from the 2nd, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. State Constitution is clear that this is our paramount duty. You've already heard that. Fully funding the basic education. It was upheld again by McCleary. After the McCleary decision, this legislature was spending over 50% of the state budget into public schools, and schools were actually doing pretty well at that time. Since then, the amount of the state budget that funds the schools has dropped significantly. Last I saw it was in the low 40%. Mr. Speaker, right now, schools cannot provide for basic education, as is the paramount duty of the government to fund, without their levies. $250 million of additional cuts to the LEA. Schools are struggling. Myself, Yelm School District, I talk about them frequently. They're a 4-time levy failure now. I tried to run a proviso and it didn't happen. None of the provisos that on my side of the aisle happened. But that's a whole different topic. We have an obligation to fully fund schools. When we were funding with 50% of the entire state budget, schools were doing okay. Right now, that's not happening. 50% of this new tax revenue would be a start, but it still wouldn't get us there. I've had several conversations with school board directors throughout this session and last, and I have one question that I ask every single one of them. If you failed your levy, could you still provide for basic education? And every single one of them has said no. The system is broken. This is an affirmative step to fixing it. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a good amendment. Please join me in voting yes. You know, these small landowners that are harvesting timber, I myself have a small stand of trees of about 20 acres. And I've had it for about 8 years, and all I've experienced is the expense for 8 years. Now, I'm probably still 8-10 years away before I am able to actually harvest the stand of trees. And I would hope that I get a significant return, especially on the investment. The concern is we already on this floor today, or yesterday now, voted no to be able to average over 5 years. The expenses being recovered are almost never expenses that occur in the same year as harvest. The replanting efforts, the land management, the thinning, the underbrush management, the equipment, none of that is happening, or very little of that is happening in the year of harvest. This is a way to protect those landowners when they do have this once in 20, 30, 40 years of profit that comes in that is expected to last them an additional 30 or 40 years. So with all due respect to some of the arguments that we've heard, the fact that these can just be written off is just not practical or realistic or how it works. So please vote yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Urge you to support this amendment. In the current form of the underlying bill, there is a very low likelihood that military members will meet the $1 million threshold. In fact, I'm not aware of any that would even come close, especially veterans not coming close. The concern is that this is just a current $1 million standard deduction and can be lowered at any time by this legislature moving forward if the underlying bill passes. So we heard a little bit about how appealing Washington is. So I'll tell you a little story about myself. I was born and raised in Washington State. One of my first main duty stations was in Texas. Well, they were coaching soldiers to change their home of records to Texas because Texas doesn't have a state income tax. And they were quite shocked to hear that I was already in that same situation, being from Washington State. Now, later on in my career, in fact, when my career was coming to an end, I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was interviewing for civilian jobs. And I had 2 nearly identical job offers, one in Eugene and then one right here in Olympia. And one of the deciding factors when I was sitting down with a financial planner going through my exit workshops from the military, looked at the different tax structures in the different states respectively. Well, I was very happy to know that at the time, Washington still didn't have an income tax, and I would save a substantial amount of money or have much more money in my pocketbook by moving home to Washington State with the exact same dollar amount in the contract. That is the reason that I actually moved back to Washington, other than it being my home. I'm afraid that by passing this legislation, we're setting the stage for the standard deduction being lowered and lowered and lowered until it will actually capture the average active duty or retiring or disabled veteran. So I would urge you to join me in adopting this amendment and make sure the Army can continue to roll along.
Further remarks? The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, again, it is unlikely that any service member right now will be able to meet this threshold. The concern is shifting goalposts. That's something that I've seen in my short time here in this body, is that talk about one thing.
Member has 26 seconds left.
Talk about one thing and it changes to another. This $1 million standard deduction will come down over time, and let's put it in the statute now that the military pay is protected. Please adopt the amendment.
Remarks, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment does 2 things. First, it ties this $1 million standard deduction to the individual, which would change it so that couples that are married and filing jointly would have a $2 million standard deduction. Secondly, this amendment would change the intent language of the underlying striker to state that the legislature does not intend to ever lower the standard deduction below $100,000. Now, 10 hours ago when we started this debate, we had some robust discussion about intent language as well as concerns about binding future legislatures. Well, I think that as far as changing the intent language here, We know that the intent language isn't binding because a lot of the things in the intent aren't in the underlying striker, so I don't see an issue there. And then secondly, we've heard about concerns with binding future legislatures with decisions that are made today and not wanting to tie the hands of the legislature in the future. Well, I also would argue that that's not really a concern, because just 2 years ago, with Initiative 2111, this legislature voted pretty overwhelmingly, over 70 votes in favor, to ban an income tax in the state of Washington, which is currently codified. So I think that this amendment, specifically stating that the intent is to never lower the standard deduction below $100,000, I don't think that that is too much for this legislature to be able to adopt in an amendment. But I do like the fact that it's fixing the marriage penalty and ensuring that it's $1 million per earner standard deduction and not $1 million per household. So these are both very simple fixes that do make the underlying policy just ever so slightly better, and I'd urge that you support the adoption of this amendment.
The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you,
You
Mr.
have 51 seconds.
Perfect, Mr. Speaker. So I think that it's going to be a sad day for Washington if we don't change this marriage penalty, because I forecast that without this, we'll see several financial divorces in the state of Washington just because of the tax implications on it. If I was in these shoes, I would definitely be getting a paper divorce while still continuing to be, at least in, I would still be married in the spiritual sense and through my church, but just not on paper, just because of the tax benefit that it would provide. I mean, that's a lot of money that we're talking about. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge your adoption of this amendment.
Good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The striker, this policy, it has a clause right at the end. It's not an emergency clause, it's a necessity clause that carries the same effect as an emergency clause, and that bars the citizens of Washington from running a referendum on this policy. That is why this amendment is necessary.
From the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. So this is a good amendment that is very similar to one that I had sponsored earlier, minus the intent language changes, where I may have talked about how I would get divorced and I think I'll probably, pop up somewhere for my own spouse to not be real happy with me about. But, the principle stands. Heard some concerns here on the floor about how by accepting this amendment, it would significantly impact the ability to provide for some of the programs in the underlying striking amendment. Some of those, I really just think come down to priorities. There's very different viewpoints amongst this chamber as to how the money of the state should be spent. And as the volume of amendments may show, there's also at least a large portion on my side of the aisle here that doesn't think the underlying policy is necessary to be able to balance the budget and provide for all the programs that are listed in the underlying striker. This amendment just ensures that there is not a penalty for being married. If two people are single individual tax filers, it's $1 million each. But if they're married, it's $1 million combined. That is a penalty. That is not how federal taxes work. And this is a good amendment that closes that marriage penalty. And if there's a concern about the revenue that this is going to lose out on, I can promise you, Mr. Speaker, I know 39 people that are willing to work on how to spend it more efficiently.
The member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had conversations, and you know that I've been in medicine for, over a decade here in Washington. But years ago, when the capital gains tax passed, I watched several surgeons that I work with leave out of state. I've heard a lot of talk amongst different groups of surgeons and various practices, people that I associate with, that are very concerned about this underlying proposal, because $1 million is something that, between all of the different revenue streams and 2 surgeon marriages, this $1 million threshold is something that they may actually meet. In fact, I have one in particular that has already bought a house in Southern California because it's cheaper for him and his wife to move back to Southern California than to live here under the current capital gain structure, sales tax structure, and then the idea of this income tax. Now, with a lot of these earners, if we had taken the combined $2 million for a married couple or for a household, it would have definitely not touched them. But with this amendment, it does make it better. Most of the surgeons that I've worked around are clearing somewhere close to 4.5 to 5 a year. They're not getting up into the 7s or 8s. And this would actually help the state of Washington keep some of these married physicians, talent, a need for our state, and ensure that they're not fleeing to states where people have historically fled from to come to Washington because of our great tax structure. So I think this is a good amendment. Again, I echo the sentiment of the gentleman from the 20th. I don't think it goes far enough. It's still not equitable, but I think this is a step in the right direction. It doesn't fix the underlying policy, but it's a start. So I'd urge you support the adoption.
Representative Marshall. Representative Marshall, you have 56 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you made $100,000 a month, how much of that $100,000 belongs to the government? None of it does. It's your property. Now, I understand tax rates and tax structures, but you, with your $100,000, do not have any additional obligation to give away your property just because you're doing well. Vote yes on the amendment.
Member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lots of hypotheticals on this one. Lots of hypotheticals, because going through hypothetical scenarios is exactly what helps shape policy and ensure it's well informed and make sure that it will stand up to any scrutiny that is thrown at it. However, there's a lot of hypotheticals that don't appear to have been considered. Now, in this one, we're talking about promises to the people of Washington, promises that have been broken in the past, promises from prior initiatives that I've already spoken about tonight, and state statute that says we will not have an income tax in the state of Washington. But we're still right here, Mr. Speaker. We're debating this policy. So, promises that are already broken. Now, there have been several amendments that would put into the intent section that the legislature does not intend or will not drop the standard deduction below $100,000. Those have not been accepted. This has been brought up in discussion all the way through the committee process, where it has been questioned whether or not the legislature would strictly state that they would not lower it below $1 million earners. And even during one of the media availabilities, it was stated that the legislature doesn't want to get itself into a bind, or doesn't want to bind future legislatures. This amendment just simply states that if, or we'll rephrase, when the legislature does break its promise, that the DOR will at least notify people that the state is breaking its promise. I think this is a very reasonable amendment, and if the state's never going to break its promise and really intends to actually keep this at $1 million earners, there is no reason to vote no. So I encourage you to vote yes, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a great amendment. Helps our farmers. But why are our farmers hurting? Could it be the underlying tax and environmental policies of our state that have made it so that it's actually more profitable for a lot of our farmers to not work their land? We heard about that here on the House floor over the night, that it was actually more fiscally responsible or beneficial for farmers to just leave the fields empty. Now, some of them do go into the CRP federal program, but this is for the farms that we hear about in the news that have been attacked by our bureaucratic agencies, specifically the Department of Ecology, that have no other way to fight to maintain their farms, and eventually they have to pay their own legal bills and they have to sell their depreciable assets, their equipment, because the farm's going under. Or maybe it's just because they're not using that equipment anymore because it's too expensive to work the land. This is a good amendment. Please vote yes.
Good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. 12 hours in and we're halfway done. Well, I love sports. I enjoy having really good sports teams here in the Northwest. We've had just wonderful years for both the Mariners and the Seahawks. And I want that to continue. In fact, I remember when we actually had the Sonics here. And it was a really sad day when they up and left. And there's been a lot of talk in the media about how we may be getting one of the expansion teams. We'd be getting the Sonics back. But when you look at just the economy of Washington right now, I'm concerned for the teams we already have here, the Mariners and the Seahawks, when it comes to bringing in new players that are free agents. Like you already heard, 21 states tax their professional athletes in a special way. I find that leaves Washington is not one of those 21 states, but one of the states that doesn't have any sort of an income tax. And I see that as a very attractive proposition for a free agent looking for a new place to land. When I was leaving the military, I chose Washington because of this tax structure. These athletes are going to be doing the same thing, and they're talking about a lot more money than what I was coming in here to make. Now, I'm concerned this income tax, this proposal here may be kind of the last straw when it comes to our candidacy for getting the Sonics back. There's a good chance that we won't expand to Washington State just because of this policy. There's a lot of implications here. Now, I do agree with the gentle lady regarding we need to find a good structure for the professional athletes. But, Mr. Speaker, I have the solution. We just don't pass this proposal and we don't tax those athletes anything special. Again, there's enough money and there are people that are in this chamber that are willing to help balance the budget without any new revenue.
Further remarks, the good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please vote yes for the amendment. This is a modest tax reduction. Hearing some of the arguments, hearing that the government has programs that need to be funded, I can't help but think, like, what program is doing well? DCYF? Well, no. Reporting of the climate commitment data? No. Our schools? No. Our roads? $1 billion a year underfunded, at least. That's how far we're falling behind every year. So, yes, I know that there is the perception that there is a need for more money, but the budget, the spending in the budget has doubled in 10 years. Yet every governmental program has fallen apart in that same time. Homelessness, where are we at with that? Let's give the people back some of their hard-earned money so they can get the things that they need, like personal hygiene products, and give them a slight tax break. The people deserve to keep the money in their pockets because history has shown us that the state is not the best steward of their money. Vote yes.
The member from the 2nd, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentle lady from the 30th for bringing this forward. We've heard a lot of talk today about the regressive taxes and how this underlying proposal, the income tax, is going to provide regressive tax relief. The problem is, outside of the intent section, I don't see the affirmative steps that the underlying policy is actually doing to help. This amendment directly helps with housing, childcare, education, groceries. This is direct, tangible benefit to the people of Washington, and it puts it in their control. What I see with the underlying proposal is This is going to be an additive tax without regressive tax relief for the state to collect and then the state to redistribute to the people as the state sees fit. The underlying proposal does nothing to actually stop the regressiveness of our tax system. Let's adopt this amendment and do something for the people of Washington that are currently struggling.
Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge your support of this amendment. Again, this is something tangible. Now, while I might agree that it is something that would be nice, not something that we must do, the state is failing to do the things that the state must do. Right now, even with this proposal, there is nothing that objectively is going directly to schools. I had an amendment, or one of us had an amendment earlier that I spoke in favor of that would have directed 50% of this into our schools that are currently dramatically underfunded and are relying on levies to a degree that they shouldn't have to be. This amendment, while it may not be on the top of the priority list, is something to show the people directly that this income tax will do something to benefit them. I am still looking for the direct benefits of this income tax to the people, other than the pie crust promise that it will help with all of these things with no actual direct, effective, objective, measurable relief of any kind. So, please vote yes on the amendment.
Good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this amendment's trying to do is roll back just some of the taxes that were imposed on the people of Washington last year. Because the people of Washington have been promised that this income tax that currently is only on millionaires is supposed to be able to provide for all of the safety net services, all of the public services, all the promises that have been made to the people. But there's a lot of resistance to doing any rollbacks of any other taxes. It really concerns me. But rather than keep beating around the bush and talking about pyramids and others, what this is socialism. This is take everybody's money, put it into a giant pot, and let Big Brother divvy it back out and redistribute it to the people that they see fit. The businesses, the people with small businesses, with the startups, with the advertising companies, every time they turn around, it's a new tax. It's to take money from them. It does not matter if the businesses go under, if they want to move out of state. That's acceptable, as long as there's more money for the state to be able to provide for the so-called safety net. How about with this income tax that's going to be imposed on everybody soon enough, we actually cut the other regressive taxes? The very first amendment we talked about, or second amendment tonight when we were debating, we were talking about how the consumption taxes provide stability and income taxes cause volatility. But here, we're doing both. We're adding a income tax without cutting any of the consumption taxes, and we're saying that the state's going to figure out where all the proceeds go, but not until later. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. I guess it's a trust us bro attempt. I don't know. Vote yes on the amendment.
Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I like this amendment, and I'll be voting yes today. No, I think it is really good for our libraries to have some tax relief. My family and I, we love going to our public libraries, both in Eatonville and in Yelm. I think it's a great benefit for the local communities. However, I do think it's also representative of how out of control the tax structure and the tax scheme is in the state of Washington, that there is even a sales tax that's been imposed on the libraries in the first place. So please join me in voting yes on this amendment to take those taxes off of our public libraries, and then hopefully you and I can learn from this and ensure something like this doesn't happen to other public entities, like maybe our schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this amendment would do is take the B&O tax from 2.1 to 1.75% for certain healthcare entities and skilled nursing facilities. So last year, there was a bill in front of the legislature that would rebase some of the nursing homes and do some things to help skilled nursing facilities. Well, all of that was delayed, and then on top of that, not getting some of the help that they were asking for, there was an increase in the B&O tax rate. So it was kind of an insult to injury. What this amendment will do is actually roll that back, and provide some relief, since there's a new income tax soon to be on everybody coming down the pipe anyway. This will provide some sort of tax relief to our skilled nursing facilities and some of the other limited healthcare entities. So it's a good amendment. I would urge you to support it, and let's do something objective, like I've been asking for all night, that will actually help the people of Washington.
Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be supporting this amendment. You know, capital flight's a real thing. It's a concern. You know, when we're talking about a very historically volatile tax structure to impose on the state, specifically on earners with high enough incomes to have the means to easily leave, it's an even bigger concern. You know, there was a similar discussion, and I was told, I wasn't here, that there was a very long debate when talking about the capital gains tax. And what the legislature realized after the passage was there was an initial windfall of money, followed by a substantial decrease in that revenue shortly after. Because people with the means, people that could realize capital gains, figure out ways to get around it or left the state. A lot of it was leaving the state. The same thing is likely to happen if this underlying policy passes through the legislature and is signed into law. This amendment is a reasonable and practical solution to be able to at least know if people are fleeing the state. Because my concern is that this is a Trojan horse, and it's going to be lowered and implemented onto lower and lower incomes, because the high earners that are targeted with the underlying policy are the ones that are going to leave first. And when the revenue starts to dry up, it'll be brought down to $750,000 and then $500,000. And eventually, over time, with decreasing revenues and an intent to fulfill the appetite for spending, it'll capture everybody in the state with a very low standard deduction. This is a way to be able to study it and have this underlying policy cease if we see that capital flight, so that policy can be readdressed by this legislature, thought through a lot better than this policy, and then implement something with a constitutional amendment and a ratification by the people like our Constitution says it needs to be done. So vote yes on the amendment.
The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 2538 is great because it removes this necessary clause because there is no emergency. Mr. Speaker, I think there might be some confusion as to what an emergency clause is. Right now, this underlying proposal doesn't raise to that threshold. I'd be happy to sit down with you at another time where it's more appropriate and discuss what an emergency is. But not like in the Trump administration doesn't rise to that threshold. However, this amendment is restoring what has been taken away from the people, and that is their vote when the Constitution is being amended. It's very, very simple. This should go through a 2/3 majority, like the gentleman from the 19th said. This should go through a 2/3 majority and then a vote of the people. But since the underlying policy is circumventing that, removing the necessary clause and compelling a referendum is a nice middle ground that ensures the people have proper representation, proper input, instead of the process that the people are facing right now, which they seem to have no control over. Please vote yes on this amendment.
Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment. I think the amendment is a cautionary amendment, saying that we want to cap the new hire of new employees to 100 FTEs. Doing this cap is fiscally responsible because there's a lot of uncertainties to the underlying policy. I have concern, like several other pieces of legislation that have passed out of this body this year, that this will be destined for a court